Hello, everybody, and welcome to a slightly delayed episode of the Auto Buyer's Guide podcast. I've been a little bit out of town, so has Travis been driving a whole bunch of things. So
Yep.
let's dive into this episode where we're going to be talking about Corvette versus Lexus. We're going to be talking about RAV4 towing capability, why front-wheel drive vehicles don't tow as much as rear-wheel drive vehicles, and it's not for the reason you think. We're also going to be taking a deep dive into news, why no K cars are coming to America, what the CAFE standard repeal really means for everybody, and diving into the Consumer Reports data and why the CX-70 from Mazda is a teeny bit disappointing. So Travis, I guess we should start with viewer questions. We have a question from Gerald.
Yes, Gerald says that he is a senior and has had Corvettes for many years. He's got a 2023 Stingray that he traded in his LC500 to get, but thinking about getting back into the LC. The question is, does that make sense? Also says, keep up the good work. I watch every time I'm looking for a car. Thanks, Jerry. So you have a Corvette Stingray. You're looking at your LC500 of the past and going, do I want to go back to that? And I think the answer
Yeah.
is probably yes. If you get in the Stingray every day and you keep thinking about that LC500, you may not be in the right car right now.
Time to get back with the previous wife. Yeah,
Easier to do in a car.
I would go with sure, why not? But also I think do it now. I'm not sure how senior you are, mind you, because I'm in, friends of mine call themselves seniors, and I'm thinking my parents at that age, not my dear
It's
friends. At
all
any
relative.
rate, it's all
Yeah.
relative, right? But my parents should definitely not be getting in an LC 500 because they might get in, they will not be able to get out on their own, either one of them. So obviously mobility is a problem, but I would say do it now. You might as well leap. And I've always kind of liked the LC 500. It's the pragmatist's reliable sports car.
Well, and it's gorgeous to look at. So
It's pretty.
let's not be mistaken there. I mean, the Corvette is
Mm-hmm.
going to turn heads, but the LC500 might keep them longer. I don't know how we want to put that, but it'll also, I think, age a little bit better. Totally different driving experiences in the long run,
Mm-hmm.
though. If you do a lot of driving, that Lexus is going to be more comfortable, more enjoyable. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it just comes to if you're not enjoying the car you're in and you have the means to go ahead and say, you know what, this isn't it. I like the other one better. Maybe
Yeah.
shop against what else you could get instead of the LC500, but have that in the back of your head and say, that's what I can go back to. And, I don't think there's a wrong way to go except for getting in a car every day thinking you should be in something else.
Yeah. There is a wrong way to go, and the wrong way to go would be, a used AMG because, oh my God, that would be fun, but it would eat you alive in
Yeah,
repair costs.
AMG plus your extended service contracts. Yeah,
Plus a few kidneys here and there. Although I do
sure.
love them when new, and I would always buy a snazzy new AMG. But no, I've always loved that 5-liter V8. I think it's a fantastic sounding engine as well. It's just a cool engine from a design standpoint as well. The way that Toyota designed it and bothered to make it go Atkinson cycle as well, which is something they still don't understand quite why they did it, but hey, they did.
Hmm.
And sad that it didn't really live on. I'd sort of hoped and expected Lexus to give us a twin turbo version of that engine at some point, slightly smaller, and jam that in, I don't know, the next LS or something like that. And we never got there.
No, I mean, and we're not going to be seeing the same sort of thing in the new GR-GT. That's going to be an entirely different machine.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're feeling inspired to get back into Toyota Lexus performance, then LC500 is a great way to do it.
Yep. And then next up, we have a question from Mike here, who is inspired by our Forester video online and wants to ask about other soft-roading, quote unquote, compact CUVs. After
Mhm.
watching numerous videos about the non-plug-in RAV4 Woodland, he has yet to see any details about the suspension and powertrain to explain why it can tow 3,500 pounds, which is double the capacity of the LE. As far as I know, all it offers is an extra half-inch of sidewall on its 18-inch rims. What about shock, springs, radiator, transmission, cooler, etc.? I've heard the ride is most comfortable of any RAV4, but is that all due to the sidewall increase? Nobody has tested the LE on 17-inch wheels, so I'll reserve judgment about ride comfort then. So what about this?
So, short answer on that one is that it's most comfortable likely because of the tire change. It's not like it's a drastically different suspension
Mm-hmm.
geometry or anything like that. I have driven them, but very short order. So side by side, it's minorly more comfortable. Obviously, you have some more sport-oriented models, like a GR Sport is going to be on an entirely on a different suspension, differentiated from the others.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not going to come down to anything particular about the Woodland. I think it's more about the LE specifically.
Yes.
There was a mention of the the LE and the XLE don't have it. Well, the XLE does, and it looks like pretty much every other all-wheel drive except for that GR Sport
Mm-hmm.
are going to have this 3,500 tow capacity. So it's just the
Correct.
LE doesn't.
Right. So I reached out to Toyota. We're waiting for the full answer here. But we do have an answer from their spec sheet, which is that every model will have 1,750 pounds of towing capacity, front wheel drive. The LE all wheel drive also has 1,750, but every other all wheel drive for a RAV4 will have 3,500 pounds towing capability and specifically 3,500 pounds of tongue weight. So I suspect it is either a cost cut cooling change on LE, which is possible, or it simply could be that LE has a slightly different spring rate and therefore a slightly different payload capacity, generally speaking, GVWR rating on it, and it doesn't support the 3,500 pounds of tongue weight that the other does. So that's probably the most likely reason.
Yeah, because the powertrains themselves, they're all using the same hybrid or plug-in hybrid powertrain across that lineup. Even that GR Sport is using the same thing as you get in a plug-in Woodland, and obviously those are trying to have two very different personalities. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's probably a small thing coming down no matter what to some cost savings. But that's the whole point of an LE is that you can get the
Mm-hmm.
car without all the goodies, and in this case, one of the goodies you go without is going to be that towing.
Yeah. And if you are interested in an LE, there may also be, before I get into that, there may be some difference in, preparation for a tow hitch receiver on LE. That's always possible that maybe the mount point's not exactly the same at any rate. But if you are interested in towing with your hybrid RAV4 and you have questions about it, we do have a towing video where a number of years ago I took our long-term RAV4 hybrid and we put significantly more than its rated tow capacity in it, and we drove it all the way up to Tahoe, some of the steepest mountain passes around, and total elevation change many, many thousands of feet. And actually, it did surprisingly well. We also did temperature monitoring on the inverter, on the motors, on the transmission, etc. Nothing got overheated. It actually did a pretty good job, all things considered, controlling the weight back down the hill as well. So I would not necessarily be, although I wouldn't recommend it, mind you, in an official capacity. I wouldn't be that worried about towing 2,000, 3,000 pounds with the regular LE all-wheel drive, or necessarily going a little bit over even these tow ratings. Toyota did not say, by all appearances, this is not the case, but they did not say for sure whether this was not J2807 rated, but they said they didn't think so. So this is not independently tested against any normal metric. It's relatively uncommon in the US right now for smaller SUVs, or actually SUVs of just about any description, to be rated on the same towing rating schedule and testing procedure that pickup trucks are for their ratings in North America, because people generally don't tow as much in their vehicles.
Yeah, it's really about the use case, right? So even
Mm-hmm.
if a truck has a 5,000 pound tow rating and a crossover has a 5,000 pound tow rating, people are buying the truck to do more towing more often than they are
Mm-hmm.
the crossover. So it's really about the use case. But if you are going to be towing 3,500 pounds, then I'd say make sure you have a trim that is equipped for it. If you did every once in a while need to go over that 1750, then yeah, probably not terribly worried about it.
Mm-hmm.
But something in there is different. Unfortunately, we don't have the answer just yet. But as soon as we do, we'll let you know because I myself am curious.
Mm-hmm. And this ties in with our next question, which is from Steve. And sorry, Steve, for taking a little bit of time to get back to you on this one, but it kind of tied in with this question above. And I accidentally lost this in my inbox for a bit. So this question boils down to, why don't front-wheel drive vehicles tow as much as rear-wheel drive vehicles? There were questions specifically around Honda. Basically, why can't Honda make a Pilot or a Ridgeline that could tow even like a Durango or a Ranger, let alone something else? Will they always be limited because they don't have a real truck frame? Kind of like, why doesn't Honda create a Toyota like truck or something
Mhm.
in this range where Toyota has, other companies have, and Honda's left behind? Um, in reality, this all comes down to marketing and just being pragmatic about designing a vehicle. What interest is there, or what benefit would there be for Honda to create a Tundra? I mean, we've all seen how the Tundra has sold in the United States, which is, hint, not well, generally speaking.
And
It's
and we said goodbye to the Titan a while ago as
Yep,
well.
said goodbye to the Titan. That was a money pit for Nissan because Tundra probably is not making a whole lot of cash for Toyota, if at all. And it's closely related to Tacoma and all the other body on frame things they have. Every body on frame thing they make, basically, except for the old Land Cruiser, is related to one another. So
Mhm.
that helps save a lot of money. And Honda doesn't have that kind of synergy to be able to do that. Probably why, the Nissan type might have made a bit more sense for them in a way.
Mhm.
Um, and so what benefit would there be for Honda to try and create that kind of thing? It certainly wouldn't be a money-making endeavor for them. And then why couldn't they then make Pilot or Ridgeline or whatever in its existing form tow more? That's simply down to the reality of customer preferences. Remember, as we've talked about here on the show before, it's best to think of Honda as primarily a North American car company that happens to have their headquarters in Japan, because this is their largest market.
Mhm.
Um, Everything that we see here practically in the United States is designed and engineered and manufactured here in the United States. Honda does manufacture in Japan, of course, but the bulk of what they're doing is for our market. Pilot, Ridgeline, Odyssey, etc. It was designed, engineered, and built right here in the United States. They have a decent presence in China, but it's half owned by another company, and of course they sell things in Japan. But outside that, their market's relatively limited. They don't have a huge presence in Australia or in the Middle East, where trucks are more common. So because of that, and because of their designing vehicles where we have common platforms between sedans and SUVs, trucks, etc., the Accord is at least somewhat related to a Ridgeline, for instance. Um, in that world, it doesn't really make sense to try and change the Pilot to make it tow 8,700 pounds. There's nothing intrinsically different about a front wheel drive or rear wheel drive SUV that would make them more or less capable when towing. For instance, if you took a Ford Expedition or a Chevy Tahoe or a Dodge Durango, which is going to be closer to that Pilot analogy, really, because it's a unibody SUV, if you took any of those rear wheel drive SUVs, bought a four-wheel drive model, deleted the rear drive shaft and the rear differential, you, hey presto, have a front-wheel drive vehicle. And there's nothing about that transition that is going to make it tow less. So a Dodge Durango would probably actually tow more in the J2807 rating, and it is J2807 rated. It's one of the few unibody SUVs, crossovers, whatever you want to call that thing, that actually has the same tow rating to the same standard and same difficulty level as a pickup truck. So
Right.
when Dodge says 8,700 pounds, they mean 8,700 pounds. It will hang out in its parking pole without a parking brake for 8,700 pounds. It'll do the Davis Dam test, no problem, in 100+ degree weather with cooling, etc. It'll stop that trailer as required in the distance required, etc. All that envelope of testing is the same standard that is done for F450s, etc. So that's the important part there. But you delete that rear drive shaft, it's still going to do it. That hasn't changed the transmission, hasn't changed the brakes, hasn't changed the engine or the cooling or anything else. But what does that extra 4,000 approximate pounds of towing capability get you over Pilot? Well, it gets you 800 pounds more curb weight that you have to drag around when you're not towing, and
Yeah.
all
I mean,
the
yeah.
added cooling and complexity and bigger brakes and everything else with it, that the average Durango owner is not even using that often, but they're certainly doing it more often than a Pilot owner is. So that's the basic why.
With the increased capability, I feel like you end up losing refinement along the way, and so you have things like lower miles per gallon, some harsher shifting, and a totally different drive experience because
Hmm.
now the suspension is having to be capable of the weight
Yeah.
that's applied to it rather than being more supple, more comfortable, more enjoyable
Hmm.
for your everyday drive. So there's nothing that Honda couldn't do. It's mostly just
Right.
what they're choosing to do, and I don't think anyone really is looking at a Pilot or a Grand Highlander and going, "Oh
Hmm.
man, I'm not going to get these because they don't have this towing capability. We're looking at two very different customers. So it's just,
Exactly.
and like I said, Toyota can pull a lot of parts from a lot of places. Obviously, Stellantis can do the same, although more things are probably borrowed from the Durango at this point than the Durango's brought in, since it's, a couple decades old at this point.
Hmm.
But either way, it just comes down to the use case. So yes, I appreciate that you might want a pilot that can do that. Just the majority don't.
Right. And then as a result of this, we lack the building blocks to simply pull off the shelf for such a creation. That's sort of the other thing to keep in mind. Because Honda makes things that tow maximum 5,000 pounds, whether we're talking about a Pilot or a Passport or an Odyssey or an Accord, the gross combined weight rating on these vehicles is not really that far off the mark from these vehicles. So they can use the same transmission, they can use the same engines or engine families, etc. They can use the same all-wheel drive systems, super handling all-wheel drive, IVTM4, liberally shared across Acura and Honda, etc. Lots of parts commonalities there. It's more difficult to create a modern front-wheel drive transaxle with the kind of torque converter and cooling capability and heavier duty gear sets to fit in that package space in the front of a vehicle. It's more difficult than in a rear-wheel drive vehicle where you have more room, but it's not impossible. The problem is, what would you do with it afterwards? So you make a new 10 speed, a new Honda 10 speed, for instance, and you
Mhm.
beef everything up and you change the bell house so you can put a bigger torque converter in there. You have to change the entire body of the transmission to put bigger, heavier, more robust gear sets in there. And that results in the transmission being longer, which then requires that the front suspension gets re-engineered and the front mount points on the unibody, et cetera, have to all be re-engineered to accommodate everything that goes on in the front. And then what do you do with it? Because you're not selling 300,000 Ridgelines a year. So where has this R&D money gone? And that's
You'd
that's
have
the
to
other
roll into
problem.
other models. So you'd have
Hmm.
pilots and passports that can now
Yeah,
have this amount of towing. You end up with an Odyssey that's got some real funky towing
maybe.
numbers. I
Yeah.
mean, and then someone goes, "Oh, okay, but
Hmm.
does it drive better?" And the answer to that is
Right.
probably no. Does it cost less? Definitely not.
Definitely no. And it adds
Yeah,
weight and that reduces efficiency. And it's
yeah.
the same story over and over for, GM and Ford do a lot of front wheel drive transmission collaborations. We have Ison, who supplies front wheel drive transmissions to like everybody under the sun practically, from Volvo to a number of Stellantis arms. Of course, Toyota and Lexus use Ison transmissions, Volkswagen, Audi, lots of European companies use Isons. And then we have ZF that does some front wheel drive transaxles there as well. But even if we take a look at that pool, and if Ison created a big heavy duty front wheel drive transaxle, who else would use it? I mean, Jeep wouldn't buy it because they've got rear wheel drive Jeeps for when you want to tow. And Ford wouldn't do it because they've got rear wheel drive Fords for when you want to tow, that kind of thing. Ford decided in the Explorer's redesign that towing was not a priority because they had other vehicles that towed, and the average Explorer shopper just wasn't doing it really. And so that's why its tow capacity is no higher really in real world use cases than a Pilot, for instance.
Yeah. So it's a good question, and I will say I think the door isn't completely closed for a Nissan collaboration, because Nissan did say recently that they are looking for partners,
Hmm.
not in the same sort of buyout merger situation that we were talking about months ago, but it sounds like the Frontier frame is on the market. Obviously, they're going to have some
Hmm.
stipulations there, so that's even one where you say, "Hey, Honda could be taking a close look at this right now," and then at the end of the day, say, "No, it just doesn't make sense for us."
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Honda does more collaborations because, as I've said before, and I'll say it again, Honda is, I think, to most Americans' views, a surprisingly small company. In America, Honda is pretty sizable, but
Hmm.
when you look at them on a global scale compared to some of these larger competitors that they're competing with in the United States, Toyota being the number one competitor, I think, in my mind, for a lot of Honda shoppers,
Hmm.
Toyota is so much larger. Like Honda can't even see Toyota from where they are. As far as the size and the scale of the resources available is kind of part of the problem there.
And even here in the US, you look at the sales numbers, Honda's not, I mean, they're like second to Toyota, but they're not close in so
Hmm.
many of these different categories. So
Yeah.
Depending on which model you're looking at. You're looking at a Civic and a Corolla. You're looking at an Accord and a Camry. That's where things are going to get a lot closer. Beyond that, the gap starts to widen.
Mm-hmm. Moving along, we have a question here from another Alex. It says, I hope we're doing well. Came across an article from Motor Trend discussing automotive features that have evolved so much that they don't function properly or appropriately anymore for their original intended use case. He was curious, given the number of vehicles we all drive on a regular basis, if there are any features that are still being utilized today that we feel have become overcomplicated or over-engineered in modern vehicles.
I will start with the one that is not being used how it was originally intended, and that is the cigarette lighter. Let's start right there, because they still have a 12-volt outlet in, most vehicles for sure. How many of them come with a cigarette lighter, which is originally what that situation was for?
That's actually a really good one, because on its face, the cigarette lighter port is not a very good port for electronics.
No, it's needlessly bulky.
Right, needlessly bulky. The contacts get loose easily. It's not really designed for a huge amount of power. And if you want to plug in an air compressor or something like that, they're better connectors to use in a vehicle.
And could you not do that over USB-C doing 100 watts? I mean, you
Yeah.
might not be able to, but there are cars that have 100 watts
100 watt.
in 2
Yep.
or 3 rows. So
Yep.
why do we still have this?
Yes, exactly. I mean, you're getting pretty close to being able to run an air compressor off of USB-C, especially if we're talking about some of the, the Thunderbolt and other expansions of USB-C where you can do 240 watts. I mean, you could definitely run an air compressor off that. But yeah, there's just so much old tech going on with that 12-volt port. It seems hard for everybody to delete it, although I kind of wish they would, and they would give us more USB ports. I think that for me would be an appropriate trade, is delete the cigarette lighter in a new car, and in its place give me another high output USB-C.
Because there's room in the space to do 2 more USB-C ports.
Yeah. I could handle just one if it was a high output one. Like give me a 200 watt USB-C port, just one. I'd be okay with that 12-volt thing gone.
Yeah, and I think Subaru would be in the last ones to hold on to it, because there are still some of the few cars that you can get an auxiliary plug-in. So yeah, I can see that being the last holdout for Subaru, is that 12-volt cigarette lighter.
Yeah. A lot of this Motor Trend article that was linked there was complaining about software and screens and things like that. And so it's kind of an interesting twist there from what the original thought process was, too complicated or over-engineered in a way. But, I do have to admit that as much as I love adjusting things in software, I think that the software experience in many vehicles could actually be simplified by bringing some buttons back. If we did not adjust our climate control for the most part in software, you could declutter a lot of that and pull those buttons out and just have them as physical buttons for the climate control. That's something that I definitely would like to see, and leave the more complicated ones up in there. Like, we were driving the M5 wagon a few weeks ago, and a passenger in the car was complaining, why are my feet cold? And I'm like, God, I know there's a way to fix this in M5, because in BMWs, you can adjust the footwell temperature for driver and front passenger independently of one another. And that way, regardless of what temperature you have the auto climate control set to, you can prefer a warmer or a cooler footwell area. At any rate, I knew it was in there somewhere, but it took a while to get to it.
Yeah, especially while driving. That's a passenger has to do it sort of thing, because the driver has to do this thing called driving. But when you look at companies who are trying to do some clever stuff with their buttons and switches, so Kia Hyundai had that swappable HVAC versus stand. See, but that is an attempt to not add buttons but keep the functions in place, and lots of people didn't like it.
Yeah, it was a bad one. It should never have gotten off the ground. Yeah. I think that the climate control thing has gotten maybe a little bit out of control. I don't know how old you were when automatic climate control really became a thing, because they had it in the 70s. It didn't work well, as I recall. Might be a decade off there, but the 80s came along, and we really started to see Buicks and Cadillacs and things like that having automatic climate control. By the
Mhm.
90s, we started seeing it really spreading out, having auto climate control, at least as an option in a lot of vehicles, a lot of near luxury and things like that. But
Yeah.
also, like, Chryslers would have auto climate control. I had an LHS that I was like, ooh, auto climate control.
Mhm.
Um, and then we started getting 2-zone climate control. Then we started getting 3-zone and 4-zone climate control. And at this point, 4-zone climate control is getting pretty common in lower end luxury vehicles, and 3-zone
Mhm.
systems are just like the thing in
Yeah.
all sorts of family vehicles, from
If it's a
pilot,
three-row,
passport.
just
Yeah,
about assume there's 3
3 row,
zones.
3
Yeah.
zones. Yeah. The thing that I find not necessarily over engineered, but maybe unintentional about this is just the cost creep that everybody complains about and thinks about. So,
Yeah.
if we thought about a family vehicle from maybe 30 years ago, AC was optional. Power windows maybe were optional on some of them.
Mhm.
They didn't have all-wheel drive always. They probably didn't have a
Barely.
turbo.
Yeah.
They didn't have power seats necessarily in the base models. Leather seats were not even available in a decent number of vehicles. We didn't have those huge moonroofs or LCDs everywhere, et cetera. So, when we
They
look
also
at
didn't have nearly as many airbags, right? These
yeah,
sorts
not
of
as many
things.
airbags. I'm just like sort of excluding safety features here because I think we could say progress and time moves on and we deserve safer vehicles,
Sure,
but
for sure.
the customer preference has a lot to do with why we have all the power doodads in modern cars,
Yeah.
because that's what customers want. Everybody wanted leather, they wanted this, they wanted that, and then they're shocked when they ring up all those charges at the end and it's expensive.
What? Why is my car so expensive? Because you
Yeah.
love it so much, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's one of the answers is because it has the things that you want.
It's the ultimate middle class wasp grocery store run, right? You go through the grocery store and you're like, oh, I'd like the organic milk. Oh, I'm gonna get my cheese from Switzerland. I'm gonna go do this. I'm gonna go do that. And then you get to the register and you're like, $300. I only have 30 things in my cart. It's like,
Why
yeah,
are groceries so unbelievably expensive now?
thank you, Biden. No, we're not going there. Um,
So here's another
but
one
her
that isn't
emails.
working. The other one that isn't working the way it was intended, and that's keys. So for me,
Yes.
the car key is just worlds apart from where it used to be. I remember a time when you had a physical key. I still have a
Hmm.
vehicle that actually now has a different physical key for the doors than it does, for the ignition. And then, of course, you had a key fob, but that was a totally separate thing. And then you
Hmm.
had key fobs and keys combined into one thing. And I thought, okay, we're in a good spot. That's nice, right? Nice and easy to use. And then you didn't have to use the keys, so it became a hideaway key. And I said, okay, cool, even simpler. But now keys either don't have any key whatsoever, or there's no point because your phone is your key, or you have a card key as your phone key. So that's one that has definitely
Hmm.
changed. And as someone who drives a car that doesn't need a physical key, I could get a key fob if I wanted to, but I don't want to. I have a spare key that just the other day I handed to somebody who didn't have their phone set up, who was driving my car. I said, "Here's the card. Tap it here and here, and it'll be fine." And then I checked to make sure it was locked later. I don't carry around keys. I have,
Mm.
smart locks on my home, so
Damn
why have car
millennials.
keys? And now I have seen features taken off of keys. And I remember specifically, I mean, this might be the old man gripe in me, but I remember my 2017 Audi A3,
Hmm.
my A3 e-tron had remote engine start, but not on the key fob. They put it on the app, and you had to
Hmm.
pay to use the app. So
Hmm.
why do I have a
Hmm.
key? You know?
Yep. Yep. I will say I prefer a key. I just think that they shouldn't be quite this big or this heavy. There was this time where manufacturers claimed that customers preferred a heavier key. They wanted it to feel luxurious and substantial.
Yeah, the
And
feel
I
of
thought that was
quality.
just dumb. I just wanted a smaller fob. I like the fact
Mm,
that it's separate. I like the fact that you can start and stop, your lock and unlock the vehicle and that kind of thing. But I don't think we need this many buttons. I actually think that the Lucid Air has a great key because it's relatively small and slim.
mhm.
It has just one button, and you can use that to open the trunk or lock and unlock and open the front. I think maybe that's a little bit too few. Maybe there could be one extra button, but basically they've proved you can make a key that is intrinsically smaller and lighter and cheaper and easier, etc. But also, this is just too much of a moneymaker for stupid dealers. So I'll just say that right now, because you want to
Hundreds of dollars.
you lose this puppy, and it's very expensive to get back. And part of that is, okay, it's the key here because you got to cut this silly little thing, but you know
Mhm.
what, just have some fobs without that silly little thing, and they could be A, cheaper, B, let the customer program them, and C,
Mhm.
sell them directly from the car company, because there
Yeah.
is no way that GM is selling the dealer this key for like $500. This
No,
is
but
probably
that's what
like
you're
a
gonna pay for.
50. Yeah, this is like a $50 key here when you crack it open and you look at what's inside this darn thing. It's a little
Yeah.
tiny PCB, which they make a
Mhm.
bazillion of every second in China. It's
Yep.
got a tiny little button battery, which costs 5 cents, and it's got some plastic buttons, and that's
Mhm.
it. It can be programmed by the end user, because there are a few select vehicles out there around the world where you can actually go buy another fob from the car company and you can program it yourself in the car.
Okay.
And so it can be done, and it could be the easy way to deal with this problem, I would say. I think some of the app drive, that drive to the apps in the phones, is simply this reaction to the dealer and the cost of these things. Because if it was half this size, half this weight, um, I would probably never worry about the car app again.
Right. And I will say it's not for nothing. There are some cool keys out there that do some unique stuff. Unfortunately the Hyundai key is not one of them. They've got their H logo, but it's not only one of the largest keys that you'll find out on the market, especially for the vehicle, but it scratches up and it just doesn't look quite the way I think it should.
Yeah.
Then you have things like Rivians who have a really fun, cool, quirky, unique design. It's not going to be for everyone, but you can carabiner it onto something without throwing a carabiner on it, right? Built in. You also have some that can do, some quick key functions. I think there have been at least one or two where you could get a key that was a little waterproof bracelet or something
Mm-hmm.
for the adventure seeker, and you can leave the
Yeah.
key in the car, but you can still get in and get out, or you can use a touchpad to get in and get out. So lots of different ways
Yeah.
to do it, but the key has changed drastically.
I have to admit, I think that Hyundai currently has one of the nastiest looking keys to my eye. And it's not that the design is, I think, intrinsically bad, because the H logo is kind of cute that it's in the key, whatever. It's that they made it
Mhm.
out of shiny plastic, and the plastic under the shiny plastic is not shiny or gray. It's white. And that thing scratches like there's no tomorrow. I have never seen a Hyundai H logo key that looked good
And
after
it's
30
bulbous.
seconds in the wild. Yeah. The
Yeah.
bulbous, I'm like, I I can't forgive it, but I'm like, that offends me less. I think the
Okay.
Genesis key is also a little bit cheesy, and I think the
Mhm.
reason maybe that I'm offended by two of those two, is that Genesis has some really nice interiors.
It's true.
And the Palisade calligraphy interior and the Ioniq 9 calligraphy interior are really good looking interiors. They punch above their weight as far as the brand and the pricing goes, but then you hold this thing in your hand to lock and unlock the car all the time, and you're like, ew.
I missed the old mini key, the circle that you inserted and
Mhm.
then push to start. And now Mini, doesn't have a key slot, but they've got a turn
Mhm.
knob to act as a key, which kind of a fun throwback. I hate to
Mhm.
call it a throwback, but at this point, it kind of is.
Yeah. It's I am surprised that so much engineering has gone into some of these key designs that are just not good. That's what
Mhm.
strikes me kind of funny sometimes. Let's move along here, and we have to get to the news. And big news story. Did you hear K cars are coming?
I heard, and I'm so excited, and I'm waiting for all of the announcements from every manufacturer who currently makes a K car and to see what they're going to bring to the US.
I want
However, that
I
those
want a
announcements have been slow coming.
I want a Twizy and a
Mhm.
Jimny and a
Mhm.
Ray, and I want one of those adorable little K car fire
Hold
trucks.
on,
That's
I'm
what I
putting this
want
on your Christmas
on my
list. We're gonna
Christmas
send that off
list.
to Santa and see which ones, get delivered.
Yeah, and you know what? Santa's going to be the only one bringing them to you, because there ain't no way we're going to get K cars in America.
Here's the thing. On one hand, I understand a headline and go, "Yep, this was
Mhm.
said." You wanna address it or you wanna talk about it. On the other hand, you're doing it for clicks. You know what I would not do at
Hmm.
all if I was a manufacturer here in the US or made cars that went to the US? Make any changes at all in my future planning based on anything said over the next couple years, because look how quickly everything is changing and everything is moving. And nobody can just import a K car that is already existing, even if it meets our new fuel standards that will,
Hmm.
whatever those end up being. They're not going to pass safety crash test ratings, and nobody is going to buy them.
Yeah, and that is the bigger problem, is that a statement by the president doesn't create legislation. There would
Hmm.
have to be quite substantial legislative changes to allow K cars in the United States. They don't meet FMVSS standards for lighting or safety or design, etc. So that would have to happen, or the car companies would have to somehow figure out how to meet those standards. I think a lot of people don't realize how insanely slow K cars are, and there's a lot
Hmm.
of complaint and commentary around, oh, the Nissan Rogue is so slow because it's 0 to 60 in 8 seconds. Like, have you seen how slow a K car could be?
Yeah,
Some of them might not even get to 60 miles an hour.
correct.
The gas standards kind of are not exactly tied in with this, because I'm sure they'd probably meet the gas standards. Would they meet the emissions requirements? That's a trickier one.
Especially if they're really, really low cost. There's reasons
Yeah.
they are low cost.
And then there's the would anybody buy it thing, which I just don't see. I mean, a small number of people probably would, I'm sure, but I just,
What I go, look at
yeah.
whatever Honda, the Beat, I think, is one of the ones that I just thought was super cute. And I go,
Hmm.
yeah, if I could buy one on the cheap and just putz around town, that might be fun. And I'd be the only person
Yeah.
because it's just not practical. It's not safe. It's not
Hmm.
economical. And you look at a world where everyone here in the U.S. is getting vehicles, in my mind, that are bigger than they need. Why in the world would you bring a smaller car than you ought to be
Hmm.
driving and expect it to do anything successful?
And I think the other problem is, even if somehow you could harmonize all the laws so that they could be sold as is straight from
Mhm.
Japan, mind you, obviously we would need some new button labels and software, because the average literacy of in Japanese in America is going to be real
Low.
low, right? So
Pretty low, yeah.
that's a problematic thing.
Mm,
Even if we go through all that, they're not going to be as cheap as people think. Let's put it that way. None of
yeah,
these K cars are going to be the $10,000 marvel that people want them to be. But
no.
that moves us along pricing wise. Lot has been said about the relaxing of the cafe standards now and removing them.
I
Admittedly,
mean,
they seems like so far they still exist, but there's no fine, and it looks like there's direction to try and change them.
talk about a Christmas present. Every car is gonna get less expensive, effective immediately. Congratulations, American consumer.
Hmm. Hmm.
There's only one problem with that. Cars aren't more expensive because of fuel standards, not in the way that's being advertised. I went and read a I guess an official announcement document that said that each car will cost about $1,000 less, and that's not chump change. But you know what's not going to make the difference is getting the internal
Hmm.
combustion engine option, not the hybrid engine option. Saving your $1,000, but in 2 years it costs you more than $1,000. So what did you really save? And that one
Right.
I don't really think makes sense. There was also an argument made, and I'm not going to get political, but I had to laugh a little bit because they talked about how many lives would be saved because now people can buy newer vehicles because they can actually afford them. And I went, I'm not sure those numbers are really based in much
Yeah,
reality, but
there are a
but we
lot of
love we
moving
love
parts.
optimism.
Right. There are a lot of moving parts. There's claim that, oh, they could be lighter because they wouldn't need this or that, et cetera, and that could help save lives, et cetera.
Hmm.
Um, there are a lot of moving pieces here, including the problem here that gas is cheap right now, which is part of why some people are going rah rah. Let's reduce the fuel economy.
Hmm.
But gasoline is cheap because global demand is down and supply is up. And how do we
Hmm.
think fuel economy impacts that? If you have a more fuel efficient car and everybody for decades has been driving progressively more efficient cars,
Hmm.
you reduce your demand. And we actually see the effects of George W. Bush's and some of the other Republican presidents' moves in this direction, because the theory here behind cafe is not a uniquely liberal or green thought process necessarily. Back in the before times, it was actually a very cooperative thing. It was a bipartisan contraption because one group wanted lower emissions, one group wanted energy independence. Well,
Hmm.
if you reduce your consumption, you can meet that consumption domestically. And that's part of why we see the US importing less fuel over time. It's part of why household consumption, even though the number of households in America has grown, the amount of gasoline we use in the United States has stayed actually relatively stable and even gone down slightly. So the global production, sorry, countrywide production of gasoline in the US is actually slightly down historically over the last few years,
Hmm.
but very stable actually for quite some time, even though more cars are on the road, more people are driving, etc. Average household gasoline consumption peaked in 2005, 20 years ago, even though fairly similar numbers of miles every year have been driven. And that's despite the fact that American cars have become bigger and heavier than ever before, because even though our fuel economy standards, mind you, are dumb in the United States, and we'll get to that in just a second,
Hmm.
they actually have caused reductions in what Americans are spending on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I'm not going to sit here and say that looking at the standards as they are is not a good idea. We're due for a whole overhaul, at least I think, and that's going to be let's look at not just fuel economy standards, but let's look at safety ratings. Let's look at the way we measure what how many miles per gallon things are. Let's take a moment and do a total overhaul. That sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what we're talking about, and it's tricky because you see a headline that says this is happening, so this will happen. But the reason your car is over $50,000 for the average vehicle is not because it has engine start stop. It's because it
Mm-hmm.
has 4 zone climate control and every seat is heated. That's the reason. Sure,
Yep.
it's going to play a part in it, but the other argument made was that there was a essentially a standardized mandate for electric vehicles, and
Yep.
that's just not true at all. Electrified vehicles, absolutely, but Toyota isn't going hybrid on their
Mm-hmm.
RAV4 and their Camry, and obviously the Prius always has been because they have to. It makes sense. It pushes them to go there a little bit faster probably than they would have, but what we're getting
Mm-hmm.
is better fuel economy and better performance and some really reliable vehicles. So I'm not
Yep.
entirely sure where the drawback is that all of a sudden the people are being relieved from.
Yeah, there are a lot of moving parts on the average new car cost. I mean, the part of the problem here also is we are seeing an ever increasing share of new car purchases being driven by very high net worth people. And we are seeing fewer being purchased by the core middle class. So the upper middle class and wealthy are buying more and more and more of the share of cars, which is why today we have more car options in the United States over $100,000 than under $30,000 in the United States, because that's where the money is, that's where the profit is, because those are the people doing it. And so there seems to be less incentive to make cars that are bargain basement. Also, the market has spoken, and it turns out that middle class people that do buy new cars are not buying the things that they then will turn around and say they want. They're not buying that base model with manual climate control, with cloth seats, etc.
Mhm.
And that's why some car companies, part of why some car companies have canceled the base trims. Yes, they sold, and yes, they probably didn't make as much money on them, so they're trying to focus their profits somewhere else. Absolutely correct. But they never sold in big volumes anyway, and that's why they were easy to nip out rather than just increasing the cost. So Subaru, who had actually quite a large lineup of discounted interiors with the two screens rather than the one screen,
Mhm.
cloth seats, they deleted all sorts of features here and there to create a model that they literally called the base model.
Mhm.
And they said that less than 5% of Subaru shoppers bought it. And Subaru's towards the bottom end pricing wise in the mainstream segment. They don't have anything as expensive as Dodge or Jeep or GMC
Right.
or any of those other car companies you can think of. Like nothing in their lineup is that expensive. But even they were like, yeah, nobody's buying it. So why would we design it, inventory it, stock it, warrant it, etc.? Just get rid of it.
I did see an interesting argument that it is going to help some manufacturers with profitability. I think this came from Ford
Mm-hmm.
saying, "Oh yeah, this is definitely going to help us out because it means that we can increase production, or whatever it
Yeah.
is on our higher fuel consuming models." But then you got to look at kind of go backwards and follow the trail there, and those are the models that not only do have great profitability for the company, especially because they're some of the more simple ones in the long
Mm-hmm.
term. They also are the ones built here in the US, which means they're less affected by these things called tariffs, which
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, are also not making anything less expensive.
Yep.
So, yeah, just interesting math.
I also have to remind everybody that when some of these news stories and some of the people that I talk to, even in our own industry here, people that I know, colleagues in the industry, when they're talking about these things, oh, well, the 50 mpg requirement was unachievable. Number one, we have to say, hang on, guys. That is a future target. A, future target could have been adjusted. B, 50
Mhm.
mpg does not mean 50 mpg because CAFE is dumb. And so this rule for the corporate average fuel economy standard is really old. It goes all the way back to the fuel embargo before Travis was a glint in the milkman's eye. Actually, fun fact, before I was even born as well, even though I'm old. At any rate, so it's that old. And at that point in time, we calculated fuel economy differently in the United States. And they've made progressive changes to the MPG standards for the window sticker so that consumers can see a more realistic portrayal of what the car actually gets. This is key because when people are like, oh, that Geo Metro got 60 miles per gallon, not rated on today's fuel economy scale, it most certainly doesn't. That's back
Mhm.
when the speeds were low. They didn't have a high-speed highway test. They didn't have an air conditioning test, etc. And so that's why the fuel economy numbers were big. Well, when they did the adjustments for fuel economy standards for the window stickers in cars, this is key. They only changed the fuel economy standards for the window stickers on cars. Any of the legislation behind the scenes that relates to fuel economy standards or literally anything else is still riding on that 1970s fuel economy test schedule. So when they say that corporate average fuel economy has to hit X for a particular size vehicle, it is way off what the window sticker gets. In reality, the target for 35 mile per gallon pickup trucks is already being met today by at least one engine in every manufacturer's truck lineup because those numbers are not what you think they are in essence.
Yeah, and it's not all the electric ones. We're talking about
Mm-hmm.
engines, not motors. So,
Right. But
yeah, it's
the electric
yeah.
ones play some role into this because the more electric ones you put in there, then the higher that boosts your average.
hmm And then, of course, when you talk about the shift to electrification, slowing down things like funds to increase EV charging capability doesn't help that either. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
lots of pieces of the puzzle and lots to unpack. But I've seen a lot of comments and a lot of people. I'm not going to say being misled, but maybe thinking wayward directions on these things.
Yeah. Now, I mean, if I were to be realistic, if I were to put on my king of the world hat again,
Mm-hmm. And for
the
Alex,
yeah, what would be logical would be a wholesale restructuring of the corporate average fuel economy standards and changing not only the the math behind the scenes so that way everybody's talking about the same kind of fuel economy on the
yep.
same number of scales, etc., but also changing the way that the incentives work in this structure. So the way CAFE was last redesigned had a lot of unintended consequences. And this is a George W. Bush era primarily a change. That was the last time we had some really big structural changes to CAFE. Now, one of the things they did back then at that time frame, again, bipartisan, no one's to blame here because everybody was on board at the time. But the last thing they did at this time was move to a footprint calculation. And that said, and trucks and cars have their different footprint calculations. And it's based on the dimensions of the vehicle. You have to hit these specific fuel economy targets. With pickup trucks, if you make your vehicle big enough, you hit a particular plateau where you don't have to get better fuel economy. Everything over that size is at one flat rate. Guess how big America's trucks are? They're basically all up there at that rate, except for the
Mhm.
Maverick, which is close. But that's why the Maverick with its all-wheel drive system is just fine, even with the hybrid model, because it's not really a 40 mpg vehicle, according to CAFE, that's like 50 something mpg on the CAFE
Hmm.
chart. But that's also why we cannot have anything like a tiny Toyota truck from the 70s or 80s in the US, because if it gets that small, the fuel economy would have to be really high, almost unachievably high. So
Hmm.
that probably ought to get restructured. Like maybe we should have some small trucks in America if people want them. And that's why we don't. On the car side of things, we get a relatively similar problem, but it kind of de-incentivizes things in the opposite direction. So if you get your sedans big enough and boxy enough and powerful enough, they don't get any extra gimmies for being extra large. That cutoff is fairly low. So you still have to meet pretty high fuel efficiency numbers, even if you wanted to resurrect a Chrysler Imperial or a Cadillac Eldorado or something like that. So, by the time you're Rolls Royce, who gives a shit, right? You just pay the CAFE fines. That was the logic
Right.
there.
Right.
But if you wanted, the family truckster or a big, huge Buick Roadmaster again, which
Hmm.
would in today's economy and designs would be intrinsically more efficient than a Tahoe, that
Right.
Buick Roadmaster would get some serious CAFE fines on it, even though it could be 40% more efficient than a Tahoe that would be fully compliant.
And even though the cafe fines right now are zero, again, no manufacturer is just going to say, you know what, there's zero right now. Let's go ahead
Mm-hmm.
and get this vehicle ready for production. And in 5 years, when it's ready to hit the market, all of a sudden the cafe fines are not zero. So that's
Yep.
where we run into the issue.
And that is the other problem. There are really no car companies that I can think of that are singularly America focused.
Right.
So if they're selling their cars anywhere else in the world, and nobody else has changed their fuel economy targets or standards or whatever. So how's that going to play out here?
We're, we're lone wolfing it out here.
Right. Yeah, this is unlikely to bring the resurrection of any engines back. Let's put it that way. Maybe a Hellcat,
Right,
whatever.
and as I even the Hemi returning, well, it's not like the Hemi had totally disappeared,
Yeah.
and it was also just put aside, right? So it's
Right.
not, hey, guess what? We're bringing back,
Mm-hmm.
pick an engine from 10 years ago. We're putting the Viper, we're getting an
Yeah.
SRT10, Ram 1500. No, we're not. That's
And
not happening.
and Hemi e-torque is probably real close to CAFE compliance already.
Hmm.
Probably real close.
Right.
Because again, the numbers aren't dramatically different from what you think. But the problem, I think, for everybody else is General Motors, Stellantis, Ford included, is they sell things in Europe. They're trying to sell things in China. They would really love to. And they sell things in South America, in Africa, etc., in places where fuel economy is very important to people, just from a financial standpoint.
Right.
Emissions requirements are very strict in China because they have some environmental issues they're trying to deal with, right? So, China actually has now some of the stricter environmental regulations on new car emissions. Europe is pretty close as well. So they're not going to design an engine that's extra polluting for us. That just doesn't make sense. Why you would just use the same one in everything. That's how it would go. Yeah, there's going to be a
Yeah.
minor change, like, oh, your car is Euro 6 compliant, not CARB compliant. If they can, if CARB suddenly disappears tomorrow, and yeah, that would save a tiny bit of money, but basically most emission systems and most engines are designed for the most restrictive design environment around the world. Minor exceptions, there, or if it's dramatically different, they'll just have, engine A and engine B.
Right. Now, I do have to say, the other week I drove a model not sold in the US, brought to us by a manufacturer. And that was interesting. Just hasn't happened to me before because nobody brings cars to the US to show us they can't sell us. But Nissan brought the Qashqai, and that has the e-Power hybrid system, which is what they
Mm-hmm.
were showcasing in that instance, which we'll see in the 2027 model year Nissan Rogue. But even that, not the same system that we're going to see, because they said instead of a single motor front wheel drive, it's going to be a dual motor all wheel drive.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be more powerful and then obviously less efficient. But even in this instance, you have a system that already exists and they say, hey, we're going to bring this over here, but they're already going to change it before it gets here because
Mm-hmm.
we're not that market that says, oh yeah, front wheel drive is fine and we don't need more power. We'll sacrifice, again, this is the big we, but we'll generally sacrifice fuel economy for performance every day of the week.
Mm-hmm. And I'm actually really intrigued to see how Nissan's e-Power system does or doesn't do in the United States, because it is an interesting twist. It's this desire to create a gasoline-powered EV, for lack of a
Mhm.
better phrase. And
Right.
so I could see some people being interested in this. I think it would need a bigger battery to really give you that EV feel. It's not like it's going to be 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds, although there
No.
could be a future model like that.
Yeah.
But it's a true serial hybrid only. You never plug it in, you never visit a charging station, etc. But it drives like an EV with better than gasoline performance, but lower than what I would say is traditional hybrid efficiency. If we think hybrid, we think Toyota. We tend to think Prius. We think hybrids should get 50 miles per gallon. It's not going to be that, right?
Right. I mean, the biggest issue you run into is more freeway scenarios where running in parallel has a distinct advantage. And Nissan said we've got it dialed in basically to say where we're happy with it. They said they're expecting around 40 mpg. Plus or minus. They don't have exact numbers yet, and even if they did, they probably wouldn't tell us right away. It's still a ways
Mm-hmm.
off, but even though they've got it dialed in better, it's just not ultimately going to be more efficient. But I was thinking about this the other day, and what's the difference? What's the trade off where I say, and I'm someone who tends to be pretty efficiency focused, where I say, you know what, I'm happy with this trade off.
Mm-hmm.
This works for me. This makes sense. It's not a small number. I'm pretty picky about those things, but I do like the way. I mean, and you and I go back and forth on this all the time. I really prefer the way a serial hybrid drives, not because it is more efficient, but because of the way that I experience the vehicle. It is basically one powertrain the whole
Mm-hmm.
time. You don't feel like you're bopping between the two. And I think you get the best of EV performance, which is
Mm-hmm.
instant
Mm-hmm.
acceleration and good regenerative braking, because you have bigger motors in this instance than you do on a parallel system by and
Mm-hmm.
large. But you could always do bigger motors and still have a parallel system. It just nobody's
Yeah.
really choosing to go that direction.
And I don't disagree with you on the feel front. I just don't I'm not as willing to forgive the fuel economy deficit that
Yeah.
results from it. The perpetual disagreement with Canadians over the Outlander's fuel efficiency, because a
You
lot
mean
of
the Rogue plug-in hybrid?
yeah, the Rogue plug-in hybrid's fuel efficiency.
Hmm.
Because people plug it in all the time. The diehard plug-in hybrid people plug it in all the time, and they're like, no, but my fuel economy says really high. Well, yeah, because you're plugging it in all the time. Talking
Right.
about just when you're using gas, it's rated for 26 mpg, and the Outlander's 26 mpg as well. Like, it's there's a
And
there's a
and
toll to be paid.
and the Rogue all-wheel drive is about 30 mpg. So now the Rogue plug-in hybrid is now less efficient than the Rogue internal combustion. Not same vehicles,
Hmm.
but you're putting the same name
Right,
on it and
right.
puts you in a weird spot.
And you will notice the difference out on the highway. If you're going 70, 75 miles an hour, that regular Rogue is going to be fairly efficient. The Rogue, plug-in hybrid, not so. So we'll see how the new system features out. I would say if it was faster and more EV-like than a RAV4 hybrid, and you only had to give up 5 miles per gallon, I think that would be my limit. I'd be fine with
Mhm.
it. I think it'd be totally fine. And you'd have a different set of advantages and pros and cons with a relatively similar sacrifice in fuel efficiency to, say, something like a Sportage or Tucson, because they're like 36 or
Right.
something like that.
Right.
And there's a pro and a con to the system that we have in those vehicles. The more traditional automatic feel, the mechanical all-wheel drive, etc., that takes a toll on efficiency. So, I'm not against the feel part. I'm just against the efficiency part.
Right. And Honda's doing it right now with their system. It runs mostly serial, but will swap over to parallel. But it is a electric motor driven system intentionally. So the power is not coming from
Hmm.
the assist on the parallel. That's just for efficiency. It really is coming from those motors. So in Nissan, in this instance, it's making it a little bit cheaper by not having this extra system in place. And less expensive is a good thing, especially right now where cars are always more expensive.
Hmm.
And people are saying, hey, it's a hybrid. What I drive right now gets, let's call it 26 miles per gallon, but
Yeah.
I can get this Rogue that all of a sudden is, let's call it $2,000 cheaper than a RAV4. We're just ballparking, but just say, hey, it is less expensive, and it still
Yeah.
gets, you know, 50% more
Yeah.
and miles per gallon than my current car. So that's just a win.
And therein lies the problem, because I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to guess that the Rogue is not going to be any less expensive than the RAV4 hybrid. I don't think that it could be, because motors are not cheap,
Right.
and you've got two big motors now in the
Mhm.
Rogue e-Power system, not just
Probably it's
not
probably not too different than what you're getting in the RAV4. I would guess it's gonna be a larger front motor and a smaller rear motor, but yeah, still too much.
either way. The way that they've been talking about e-Power definitely is more powerful motors than we find in a RAV4, because of the way the
Right,
planetary power split system works. We don't actually have motors that are enormous going on
right,
in there to
right.
make this work. So definitely talking bigger motors. You save on the gearbox and the clutch mechanism that we find in the Honda system, but you also need a bigger battery. And so the battery is about double the battery and battery costs, therefore, that we
Yeah.
find in a Toyota or a Honda hybrid. So that's
Plus the packaging for it. So
right.
and it sounds right now that that Qashqai is using about a 2.1 kilowatt hour battery. So
Hmm.
and I would expect that it gets a little bit bigger, maybe, and I mean like 2.2, something like that.
I'm
But
probably going to
that's
go with maybe three.
you
I'm
think
guessing
so,
it's
that big?
I'm guessing it's going to be an extra order bigger because of that extra motor in the
Okay.
back. Otherwise, it's not going to give you that same feel. You're going to have to wait for the gasoline engine to rev up a lot longer. I mean, you already have to wait a little bit, but you're going to have to wait longer for it to rev up, etc. That's the
Mhm.
other part that I'm curious to see if Americans can tolerate, because Americans had an issue with CVTs. Still don't
Mhm.
like them, right? To the
Correct.
point where the other serial hybrid, the other big serial hybrid that we get in the US, which is the Honda hybrid setup, if you're anytime you're under 42 miles an hour and anytime you're accelerating, it's basically a serial hybrid.
Mhm.
Well, they programmed imitation shifts in it that made it intrinsically less efficient and slower, because they
Mhm.
said their customers didn't like the fact that it didn't have those in it. So
Mhm.
who's going to be willing to do this electric car feeling thing and then accept that this engine's buzzing around under the hood just randomly at random speeds?
Right, and it's not gonna directly correlate with what you're doing, because you can be steady state cruising, but it's trying to recharge the battery so then it can settle down, or vice versa. You floored it, but you're not hearing anything from the motor or from the engine, and then after you lift off, then it fires up, and you go, "What's happening?"
Mm-hmm,
It
mm-hmm.
is gonna be a little bit strange, and we're in a world where people I always had some feelings about Shiftronic, right, or a manual automatic where you could bump it up or down. I went, I don't really get what this is for. I prefer to roll my own gears. I want to use the third pedal. But now we're getting it's the CVT argument. CVTs have built-in shifts, even though it makes them slower and less efficient. Now we have these
Mm-hmm.
hybrid systems that don't. In this case, they don't really even have a transmission, and they're acting like they shift. You get the Ionic 5N that acts like it shifts, and so too with the GV60 Magma. And now Porsche's saying, now we're going to make our EVs shift too, and that's just the consumer. And I hate to say it, that is the consumer making the product worse, but the
Mm-hmm.
product doesn't exist unless the consumer buys it.
This sort of ties in with our next topic, which is the latest Consumer Reports data. It is out. 380,000 cars have been surveyed. The data is up a bump from last year because they also included some 2026 model year vehicles in their data,
Okay.
in addition to the 2000 to 2025 model year data. We don't know exactly why we have an extra 80,000 versus last year, but the extra depth is handy here.
Mhm.
Big takeaway is Tesla has somehow scooted up to ninth in short-term reliability, but is dead last in long-term reliability, which is interesting. Actually managing
Yeah.
to beat out even Jeep there. Funny things though, Consumer Reports listed some complaints from new car shoppers here, new Tesla shoppers, noting some things that we had in our Model 3 that people gave us a lot of shit about as they thought we planted them somehow, including embedded hair in the paint, which is
Mm.
something we had in our Model 3. There was actually a pretty long brown hair between the clear coat and the color coat, and our viewers were convinced we had somehow placed it and staged it there. Um, then we had sort of general realignment in other vehicles there, nothing too notable. But I did want to highlight two things here. The first one is Tundra is interestingly still getting a pass, I would say, in their data here.
Mhm.
because they're now listing it as average reliability, even though we had a recent recall of more V6 engines. So
Yeah.
literally every V6 engine in the Tundra is going to fail before any of the competitors' V6 engines because of a supposed manufacturing issue. So they all got recalled. Everyone needs to get replaced in the factory. Um, Consumer Reports, of course, famously says they don't factor in recall data into their factoring, which in this instance might be a little bit of a problem here. But
Yeah.
also,
Yeah.
recent data out actually, or recent teardown videos out there, I should say, are highlighting some of the deficiencies in these engines that are surprising. And apparently, an oiling issue may be the problem, which points more to a design cause than a manufacturing flaws.
Right.
And the
Difference
last
in
one,
quality control versus
yeah,
fuel
fundamental
design
flaw.
system. Yeah. Yeah.
And the last one here, which was our friends at True Delta pointed this one out, that was an interesting take here. So I'll just read this quote. CR reported that EVs continue to be much less reliable than hybrids, but they don't seem to have performed any sort of analysis to control for make and newness of the model. They're talking
Mhm.
holistically. So a lot of those old Teslas that are really below average in reliability, again, all the way at the floor, just below Jeep. Um,
For sure.
so they acknowledge that these two variables probably explain a large portion of the difference. So they admit that the failure to account for make and newness of the vehicle greatly affect this, but they have no actual analysis, cannot put a percentage on this, and so as a result, the headline you'll see is EVs are less reliable than hybrids.
Right. I mean, I don't want to explain. I mean, again, I like EVs. I drive an EV. I drive that Tesla that is almost out of its factory warranty. Turns out it's a $50 a month subscription for my extended service contract. But
Oh,
I will not be extending my service contract. But that one was new to me.
that's not the worst.
It's not. It's about 2,400 bucks up to
Oh,
100,000 miles, so it could be
oh,
worse. $100 deductible should be okay, but I think I'm gonna roll the
oh.
dice on it.
I mean,
Could make for some interesting content.
that's like getting a replacement guarantee thing on your laptop. You know.
Right, right,
Oh,
right. You just
okay.
where do you roll the dice?
Yeah.
But I think it's worth noting that any new technology and any new model, you never buy the first model year of or first year of a new model, right? That's what
Hmm.
everyone says. That's what everyone knows. But these are essentially all new models over the last 10 years. These are all brand new cars that didn't, in most
Hmm.
cases, didn't exist at all before they came here and hit the market. So I don't want to explain it away, and I don't want to say, oh no, that's wrong data. That it's bad information. But numbers are just numbers. They don't ever tell the whole story. It's how do you want to
Hmm.
spin it? How do you want to consider it? And I appreciate this coming forward because I would have tried to figure out, well, what's going on, but that probably covers a huge percentage of it.
Hmm. And it is interesting that when they start breaking down things by model, sometimes they're not overly consistent. So what would really be telling is data that we do not have from this survey,
Mhm.
which would be like Kia Niro is hybrid, plug-in hybrid, and electric. Which one of those three flavors of Niro is the most reliable in any of these metric areas? And on some of these levels, they have some data, but not others. It's a little bit kooky there. So they're like, well, we have this plug-in hybrid from Kia and this hybrid from Kia, and then we have EV9. I'm like, well, that's a very different vehicle. We can't
Right.
say EVs are less reliable than hybrids. We could say this model is less reliable than those hybrids. And that's not as useful.
Mhm.
It is also interesting that, I mean, Subaru just launched a hybrid and they're already going like, Subaru hybrids are really reliable. Like, okay, well, they haven't been around very long. Now, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and I would put money on
Yep.
Subaru's hybrids
Yep.
being reliable because it's a Toyota hybrid in a Subaru case, right? So, like,
Right.
don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, not a lot of time has passed with that one.
Right.
Um, and it is also interesting that in some of the Hyundais and Kias, they're like, this one's unreliable, that one's reliable, unreliable, whatever. And it's like, they're the same hybrid system. So that doesn't really make a lot of sense. They literally popped out of the same factory, same
Correct.
assembly line, Hyundai and Kia both. So realistically, they should be identical.
I mean, in the same note, that's like saying the Outlander plug-in hybrid is going to be more or less reliable than a Rogue plug-in hybrid, and you go,
Hmm.
same car. What are we talking
Yeah.
about?
There's a lot of emphasis placed on vibes, I would say, as part of the problem. And I know
We love vibes.
this is the debated thing, right? But intrinsically, when you're asking a respondent to classify and categorize things, how they feel about their vehicle has a big impact on this. And that's exactly what the folks at True Delta were commenting on, really, is that in their data, when they were not asking for that, and they were trying to say, incidents in the shop, just send us a scan of what they did, like the service notes, etc. And they crunched the numbers, or they would just ask them, describe the problem, etc. Then they crunched the numbers and decided whether it was serious or not serious, etc. Their data was very different from Consumer Reports, but now they look very similar. So I think that lack of self-reporting or that self-filter from owners that like their cars is kind of a problem there. Also, the pointing out of body fitment and paint issues and things like that, like, I just still have troubles calling that reliability.
Right. It's not that it's not quality concerns, but your
Mm-hmm.
vehicle doesn't run any different. It doesn't
Right.
not run any different. It doesn't change the way that it
Mm-hmm.
operates. You don't, and unless it creates a whistle, but a whistle is not reliability. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, again, that's a quality
Right.
concern. That's a I don't know, a life cycle update. But I would also not call it reliability, and I would say
Mm-hmm.
the same for anyone.
Yeah, and hair under the paint doesn't cause an intrinsic problem with the paint's durability. It causes it to look weird and look like you have a hair under the paint. But I mean, who's to say that that's going to make the paint fly off the car any faster?
Right. Right.
That's a whole different problem, I would say.
Right.
But it is interesting that we have so little really good data on some of these critical questions. Like, if we say on a holistic level, Tesla aside, again, because there's so many changes also with Tesla, they change motor designs and battery designs, like people change underwear practically. I'm
You'll
being
barely know
facetious.
which year is the new model year
Yeah,
because in middle of the month they could
right.
change something.
And I'm being facetious there, but the key thing there is that Tesla, and not negatively on this front, but Tesla innovates and changes things in production incredibly rapidly. So
Mhm.
they don't wait till the next model year to change your motor up, to change the batteries, to change inverters, to change this or that, or whatever it is that they need to change. Whenever the next generation of that part is ready, it just gets thrown into
Yep.
the thing, right? So
Off we
so
go.
these things are happening rapidly. Not every car company does that. So we do have an opportunity, but not with this data. We do have an opportunity to ask questions and say, for a car company that develops like that, does
Mhm.
that lead to greater or lower reliability versus a car company like Toyota, where that motor and battery were designed for the car, and that thing will go to its grave with that same exact part number for
Yep.
its whole time? Like, do we have an ability to compare reliability here? We don't, because that's not the kind of data we have. But that, I think, is actually more interesting than some of the data we see here that's being misused, perhaps. Also,
Yeah.
remember when they're talking about older EVs having huge problems, we're also talking about a very small number.
Right. Right. So I'm making it up, right? But if every single 2016 Tesla Model X, now, well, 20, yeah, let's say 2016 Tesla Model X went in for major repairs, was that
Not a
couple
lot, actually.
thousand?
Yeah.
I mean, and it's not to dismiss it. It's valid information,
Hmm.
but again, you're not going to glean from that what you might think because you go, well, I bet you every Toyota Corolla didn't go in for service in the same way, and you go, well, yeah, but let's look at the numbers.
Right.
But numbers
This
don't make great headlines when you have to start thinking about them.
over 80% of Teslas ever built were built in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So if you are looking at Tesla reliability pre 2000 or 2020, pre 2020, you're talking about a very small number of vehicles, and it's way over 90 something percent were built in the last 6 or 7 years, right? So yes, Model S launched back in 2012, but that 8 years between there and 2020 did not represent a huge volume compared to what we saw this year, last year, the year before, etc. Their
Literal drop.
volume, yeah, their volume increased dramatically over that time period, which is why some of the other changes to hardware on Teslas are annoying to the people that have them, but not necessarily huge to some other people, like the lack of CCS compatibility for CCS chargers on older Teslas. Yeah, it's a
Mhm.
bummer if you have an original Model S or Model X or some of the early Model 3s, but pretty much every Tesla on the road is CCS compatible today with an adapter.
Right. No, the only annoying thing there is that people aren't going to be looking for that. So if you go buy a used Tesla, you're not going to know which one is and isn't, because it's just not something people are going to be thinking about uh,
Mm-hmm.
readily or easily, and you're not, you can't just look at it and go, oh, that is or isn't, because it's the same plug. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so that is going to create confusion, and it's not, and in no way like, oh, that's fine, but it does affect a small number.
Yep. So as always, time to do your homework. Let's close with what
Mhm.
we're driving this week. What do you have?
You know what? I've got my car, so I've got a little bit of a break, and I'm spending time in my Tesla, which is just about to hit the 50,000 mile mark.
But
And
that's because you drove a whole bunch last week.
it's because I drove a whole bunch last week. I drove a bunch of Nissans, the 26 Pathfinder, and the Qashqai, and the Rogue plug-in hybrid, which really was just an old friend, because we spent good time with the 23
Mm-hmm,
Outlander plug-in,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
and it was nice to spend some time back behind the seat, because I enjoy that car. There are things I don't
mm-hmm.
like about it, but I enjoy it overall.
And this week we have a Cadillac Vistic, which I'm kind of liking more than I want to. That sound
Mm,
wrong? It's comfy. It's big. It's comfy. It's very Cadillac-y. It is a smartphone integration away from actually being, I think, a really solid thing.
it's a
Um,
little baby Escalade.
yeah,
If you want an electric Escalade but don't need an Escalade IQ, then
yeah.
it's the Vistic.
Fantastic landing. Just sort of, wrong airport because America's not
Mhm.
into it. And I don't know if it's sold anywhere else, but maybe now's the time to be exporting some Vistics somewhere. I could actually see it doing well in China. And then I have the CX-70, which I still think is pointless.
I mostly agree. I can see where you're looking for a different vibe than a CX-90,
Mm.
but then just make it a trim on the CX-90. Call it the
Mhm,
CX-90
mhm.
Sport and just take the seats out, or something. I don't. It doesn't need to be its own vehicle, but it's not a.
Yeah,
Do you have this inline six, or do you have the plug-in hybrid?
the inline six.
Okay.
Here's what I want though. I want a bigger back seat. If you're going to delete the third row, give me the extra room. And
Well, now you're asking for too
like
much.
I know the Honda Pilot versus Honda Passport. Yeah, they changed the styling and the Passport's cuter and boxier and off-roadier looking, but at
Yeah.
its core, it is just a two-row Pilot. And the
Hmm.
formula is the same in CX-70. It's a watered down formula, but I think the
Correct.
key difference in what I think is fantastic about the Passport versus the Pilot, but is not fantastic about CX-70 versus CX-90, is that the second row seats did not move. And I think
Yeah.
that's all they needed to do. All they needed to do was push those puppies back as far as they could in the car to give the second row more legroom. And instantly there's a reason to get CX-70 because, and I think that's the problem in my brain, is I see no reason to get
Right.
CX-70 over CX-90. Some trims
Why
are
not get
actually
the 3 row
right.
when the same seating for 2 rows?
Exactly. It's like this. It's exactly the same seat dimensions. They didn't even delete the cup holders in the cargo area. Um,
No.
you didn't really gain any room back. There's a tiny bit of additional storage space, not a lot, right?
Mhm.
So why not just get the CX-90 and leave the things folded?
Yeah, no, and if I was getting one of those, I would get the 3 row option, even though I almost never
Mm-hmm.
have more than 2 people in the car. But I would
Mm-hmm.
just go, why
Mm-hmm.
would I not get the
Mm-hmm.
ability if the form factor is the same?
Yeah, and if Fluffy chews the third row seat belts and you don't use the third row, then let Fluffy
Mhm.
have a chew toy.
There you
You
go.
know, it just does not. I cannot think of a reason that it would matter, I guess is the problem. But
Yeah.
we're gonna put it through our usual tests. We're gonna see if it's a few tenths faster because it doesn't have those third row seats in there.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
And we
Weight
will,
savings goes a long way.
yeah, I'll let you all know later.
Fantastic.
See everybody next week.
Adios.